Hi there, I'm Amber Ellis, and I was a park ranger for 8 years. I won't specify where because I don't want to get in trouble. One of the people I worked with told me to read the other park ranger stories on here, so I thought I'd give it a shot. And hell, it's good to see someone being honest. It inspired me to share some of my own stories. People need to know what happens in the woods. I quit my job a couple of years ago. Um, I couldn't deal with bottling up all the things I've seen. Nobody wants to talk about them, but I feel like I'm drowning in the memories of it all. So I'm going to share them. I don't know if I'll be able to share everything. It might be too hard, but I'll give it a go. I hope this raises some awareness of the true dangers of the woods and makes people consider their safety. I don't want people to think I'm copying someone or making these things up. I'm just sharing my stories and experiences. Let's get into it. This was my first weird experience as a junior ranger. To this day, I still don't know what I saw, but I know it wasn't friendly. I had just received a call about screams coming from deeper in the forest off one of the more popular trails. This wasn't unusual. If you've heard a mountain lion, you know it can sound like a woman screaming. Just as I was about to set off, my chief at the time asked to come along. I found this odd because the job seemed too insignificant for his rank, but I brushed it off. I was new and figured maybe he wanted to check my progress. We set off, making small talk, and I was obviously trying to suck up a little. We were joking around when he made a quick remark about taking even small jobs seriously because you never know what you'll find. That turned out to be some of the most valuable advice I ever got on this job, and I definitely learned my lesson later, but that's another story. We reached the area where the call originated and headed north of the trail. We heard the screams, and it sounded like a mountain lion, but something was really off about it. We kept walking toward the noise. About 10 minutes in, all of a sudden, it was like every sound was sucked out of the woods. It was dead silent. I couldn't even hear my own breathing. I thought maybe I'd gone deaf, but I looked at my chief and saw he had the same nervous expression on his face. By the way he was acting, it felt like he'd encountered this before, which I now know to be true. Just as quickly as the silence came, I started to hear a low buzzing, but it wasn't just a buzzing. I could feel it vibrating through my entire body, so much that my ears and jaw began to hurt. The best way I can describe it is like when you're getting your teeth drilled at the dentist, but worse. Even my vision started to vibrate, and as that happened, I swear I saw a black figure about 7 feet tall step out from behind the trees in front of me. It started letting out that same scream as it bent down and began crawling toward us. Naturally, I freaked the hell out and stepped back to run. My chief grabbed my arm hard, almost knocking me over, and put his other arm around me as he began to walk me out of the forest. Just as I was about to fight him and yell for us to run, he said in a calm voice, "Don't run, don't talk, don't look back, just keep walking." I did exactly what he said. He obviously knew something I didn't, and as much as I wanted to run, I didn't want to find out what would happen if I did. Those 10 minutes were excruciating. I could tell it was crawling behind us by the buzzing in my head and the faint wailing sound it made. I wanted to run so badly. Eventually, I think it ran off because all the regular noise of the forest came back and the buzzing stopped. When we got back on the trail, I was shaking. I was in such shock I couldn't even cry. He let go of me and started walking back to the main base without saying a word about what happened. I started screaming at him, asking what the hell that thing was. He said, and yes, I remember this word for word. There are things in these woods that have been here longer than us, things we can't explain or get rid of. If you don't think you can handle that, you should pack your bags now. He kept walking, and I followed behind, trying to make sense of what happened. I obviously stayed in the job. When it was good, it was really good. I met some amazing people, and I loved nature, but in the end, the bad experiences outweighed the good, and I had to leave. Honestly, I wish I had left when he told me to pack my bags. I know this experience doesn't sound that scary in writing, but trust me, living through it was terrifying, and there are worse ones. Some of them are scarier, some are more explainable. I'm still debating whether to share all my stories. Maybe I'll see how I feel after posting this. I'd love to hear other people's experiences with the woods. Part 2. A lot of people seem to be interested in stairs found in the woods. I've seen a set of stairs in the woods once, and personally, it wasn't too scary, just a bit creepy. I know a couple of my friends in the force, a force to be reckoned with, have some stories about stairs that they've mentioned in passing. If and when I decide to contact them for permission, maybe I'll post those. I do, however, have a story about a ladder that I wish I could forget because just thinking about it gives me the creeps. My experience with the stairs is pretty tame, so I'll add another incident afterward. We were searching for a young girl who had wandered off. We found her. She's fine. She's fine. The team was stretched out pretty far, so I was walking alone but within shouting distance of others. As I was walking, I saw a set of stairs. They sort of looked like they belonged there, but also didn't. They were overgrown, like they might have been the steps to someone's house, but I realized there was no way someone had put them there recently. I figured I'd stumbled upon one of those mysterious stairs my coworkers had talked about. I thought I'd be terrified if I ever saw them, but I wasn't. I did, however, feel an urge to walk up them, like something was pulling me toward them. Maybe it was just the excitement of finally seeing them, or maybe something darker. Someone nearby called out that they'd found something, and it snapped me back to reality. I'm really glad they did. I'm not sure what would have happened if I'd gone up. We found the girl, and all was well. On the way back, I mentioned to a partner that I had seen some stairs. She got worried and sort of grilled me about whether I touched or walked up them. I said no, and that was it. So, yeah, pretty tame, nothing too intense. I'm not going to lie or overemphasize anything here. This next occurrence isn't about stairs, but it is about a ladder, which I'd say is pretty similar. This happened sometime during my first year as a park ranger, around the start of summer when poison ivy really goes wild. We had to do weekly checks on the trails and the surrounding brush. My partner and I were assigned to check some of the less popular trails. We came to a smaller trail that forked for a couple of minutes and then joined up again. Being the idiots we were, we split, planning to meet where it connects. We could still see each other through the brush in the middle, so we thought it was fine. He took the left path and I took the right. As I was walking, keeping an eye out for ivy, I caught something in the corner of my eye, a large clearing in the middle of the trees. It looked man-made, perfectly round, as if someone had been maintaining it. There wasn't a single tree, bush, or even a weed. I was so focused on the lack of vegetation that I almost didn't notice the huge, unmistakable ladder standing right in the center. It was upright and leaning against absolutely nothing, like some unknown force was holding it. I looked up and saw a man at the top wearing a business suit. It almost seemed comical, like he'd walked straight out of a corporate office. His head was tilted back, staring up at the sky, and his mouth was wide open. I couldn't get a clear view, so I called to him a few times. No response. I circled the ladder, looking for wires or strings, hoping it was some sort of prank or art installation, but I found nothing. He looked like he was on display for some bizarre exhibition. I didn't know what else to do, and I couldn't see my partner, so I radioed him to come over. While waiting, I made the stupid decision to touch the ladder. I know, terrible idea. Don't touch weird crap you find in the woods. I got a weird feeling just before my hand reached it, but I brushed it off and touched it anyway. The moment I did, the man at the top snapped his neck in this horrifically contorted way to look at me and let out an ungodly gasp, like he was drawing his last breath. His face was still warped in this gaping expression, eyelids and lips pulled back as though he were in perpetual shock. I stumbled back and grabbed my taser. Just then, I heard someone behind me and I spun around, taser raised. It was my partner, hands in the air to avoid getting tased. When I looked back, the ladder was flat on the ground and the man was gone. My partner asked what was going on, so I explained and begged him not to think I was crazy. Of course, he didn't. He knew as well as I did that weird stuff like this happens more often than you think. We had to do a quick search for the guy, protocol, which I hated. I was praying we wouldn't find him. We didn't. I never saw anything like that again, and neither has anyone I've talked to. That guy was balancing on top of a ladder that wasn't leaning against anything. Maybe I met Houdini. When you see stuff like that, you make jokes, or you'll never move on. I'm really glad people are enjoying what I have to say. I'm not sure when I'll write more. Don't expect too much because this is both tiring and cathartic. I'm thinking of sharing some of the less spooky stories and the ones that are just about humans being weird. We'll see. I had done this 100 times before. Searching for missing campers was part of my job as a park ranger, and honestly, it usually ended with someone just lost or confused. But this time felt different from the start. My name is Ethan Harper, and I've been a ranger at Eagles Shadow National Park for over 10 years. The place is vast, miles of dense forest, winding rivers, and jagged cliffs. It's beautiful, sure, but unforgiving if you don't know your way. Daniel Clean, the missing camper, had been out there for 3 days now. He hadn't left a single trace behind, which was strange. Most of the time, lost hikers left footprints, scraps of food wrappers, or at least a trail of some sort, but not Daniel. It was as if he had just disappeared. My team for this mission was small but solid. There was Sarah Morales, my second in command and one of the best rangers I knew. Calm under pressure, smart, and someone I could always count on. Then there was Dr. Greg Owens, the park's biologist. He wasn't much of a hiker, but he knew the wilderness like the back of his hand. Jake Donnelly and Mia Caldwell rounded out the team, 2 younger rangers, both eager but pretty green. I wasn't thrilled about taking rookies this deep into the forest, but I didn't have a choice. We set out in the late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows through the towering pines. As we hiked deeper into the Whispering Pines section of the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the thick, almost suffocating silence that blanketed the area. It was more than that. An unspoken tension hung in the air like the forest itself was watching us. "Ethan, look at this," Sarah called out, breaking the silence. I turned to see her crouching over some animal tracks, but there was something wrong with them. They led a few feet into the underbrush, and then nothing. The prints just stopped, as if whatever made them had been lifted straight into the air. "That's not possible," Greg muttered, scratching his head. He bent down to examine the tracks more closely, but even he didn't have an answer. No predator out here could do that. "It doesn't make sense." We pressed on, though the unease was starting to settle in my gut. The deeper we ventured into the forest, the quieter it became. No birds, no rustling leaves, not even the wind, just silence. And that silence felt wrong. The first real scare came when Jake froze in his tracks. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Hear what?" I asked, scanning the trees around us. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. "A cry. It sounded like someone calling for help," Jake said, his face pale. "But it didn't sound right." "Probably just the wind," I said, trying to keep things calm. But inside, I knew something wasn't right. The wind hadn't made a sound all day. We finally reached Daniel's campsite just before the sun dipped below the horizon. His tent was still there, untouched. His supplies were all in order. It didn't make any sense. If Daniel had left, he hadn't taken anything with him. His backpack, his food, even his water bottle. Everything was still in place. "Why would he leave without his gear?" Mia asked, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't have an answer for her. None of this added up. "People don't just vanish without a trace." "We'll set up camp here for the night," I said, though I didn't like the idea of staying in this place any more than they did. We'll keep searching in the morning. As we began to settle in, the light faded, and the forest seemed to change around us. The shadows grew longer, darker, as if they were creeping closer to our camp. Sarah sat by the fire, staring out into the trees. Suddenly she stood up, her eyes wide. "I saw something," she said, her voice shaky. "Out there. A figure. It was watching us." I grabbed my flashlight and swept it across the tree line. Nothing. Just endless trees stretching into the darkness. "Maybe it's Daniel," Jake suggested, though he didn't sound too sure. "Or maybe it's something else," Mia whispered, barely loud enough to hear. The air had grown colder a bit, the fire flickering weakly against the increasing chill. That's when we heard it. The first howl started low and distant like the wind, but then it grew. It was a deep, guttural wail, almost human, but warped and wrong. It echoed through the trees, sending shivers down my spine. "Stay close," I ordered, gripping my flashlight tighter. But deep down, I wasn't sure staying close was going to be enough. This wasn't just a search anymore. Something was out there with us. And whatever it wasn't human. I didn't sleep much that night. None of us did. That strange howl echoed through the trees for hours, low and haunting, like something was calling out to us. We huddled by the fire, trying to convince ourselves it was just an animal, maybe a wolf or a coyote, but deep down, I think we all knew better. By morning, the fire had burned down to embers, and the forest was eerily quiet again, too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. The kind of silence that made your skin crawl. I glanced at Sarah, who was rubbing her arms, her eyes darting to the tree line every few seconds. "We should keep moving," she said, her voice low. "I don't like staying here." I nodded in agreement. The sooner we found Daniel, the better. The campsite had given us no answers, only more questions. Why would he leave his gear? Where did he go? And what was that awful sound we kept hearing? Jake, looking paler than usual, kicked dirt over the fire to put it out. "What do you think it was last night?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but the edge in his voice gave him away. "Just the wind," I lied. But Jake didn't look convinced. Neither was I. As we packed up, Greg tapped me on the shoulder. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the trees surrounding our campsite. I followed his gaze and my stomach dropped. Deep claw marks gouged the bark, long and jagged. They weren't there when we arrived last night. That doesn't look like anything I've seen before," Greg said, his voice shaking a little. "Too big for any animal around here." I swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. Let's not jump to conclusions. Could have been a bear. But even as I said it, I knew it didn't make sense. Bears didn't come this far into the forest, and these marks were way too big, too deep. We set off again, moving deeper into the whispering pines. But the deeper we went, the more the forest seemed to close in on us. The trees here were taller, their thick branches creating a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. Everything was dim, shadowy, like the woods were swallowing us whole. Hours passed, but we hadn't found a single clue about Daniel's whereabouts. Just more silence. And then, out of nowhere, Jake stopped dead in his tracks. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, looking around wildly. I frowned. "Hear what?" Someone calling for help," he said, his face pale. It sounded like Daniel. We all stopped, listening, but I couldn't hear anything. "Jake, are you sure?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. "I swear, Ethan, I heard him," he insisted, his hands trembling. "He was calling my name." I exchanged a glance with Sarah. Something wasn't right. Jake was jumpy, too jumpy, and it was starting to get to the others. "Maybe you're just hearing things, Jake," I said gently, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "We're all tired." Jake shook his head furiously. "No, I heard him. He's out there." "Let's keep moving," Sarah said, her voice tense. "Standing around here isn't going to help." Reluctantly, Jake fell in line, but I could tell he was still on edge, glancing over his shoulder every few minutes like he was expecting something, or someone, to jump out of the shadows. As we trekked further into the forest, the trees grew thicker. Darker. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on us. I could feel the tension rising in the group, every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves making us all jump. I tried to stay focused, but the forest seemed to twist and turn in ways that didn't make sense. It was like we were being led in circles. And then, just as I was starting to think we'd never find our way out, Jake gasped and pointed ahead. There! Do you see him? We all looked, but I didn't see anything at first. Just trees, shadows, and the dim light filtering through the branches. But then there was a figure, far off, just barely visible between the trees. Daniel, I called out, taking a step forward. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, still and silent. I took another step, but Sarah grabbed my arm. Ethan, wait, something's wrong. She was right. The figure, it wasn't acting like a person. Its posture was off, twisted in a way that made my stomach turn. And its eyes, they were black. Completely black, no whites, no pupils, just empty, soulless darkness. My blood ran cold. Jake, stay back, I warned. But Jake wasn't listening. He was already moving toward the figure, calling Daniel's name. Jake, stop, I shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him back. The figure didn't move. It just stood there watching us, its dark eyes locked onto mine. Then in an instant, it vanished, disappearing into the trees like it had never been there. What the hell was that? Greg whispered, his face pale. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we needed to get out of this forest. Fast. Something was out there, something that wasn't Daniel, and it was watching us. We didn't talk much after that, not even Jake, who had been rattling on all day about seeing Daniel. Now he just walked in silence, his eyes darting from tree to tree like he was expecting something to jump out at him. And honestly, I couldn't blame him. I had seen it too. That twisted figure with its black, soulless eyes. The sun was starting to set again, and the shadows in the forest stretched longer, darker, until they seemed to blur together. We needed to make camp soon, but I couldn't shake the feeling that stopping would be a mistake. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to keep moving, to get out of this cursed place as fast as possible. But the others were exhausted, and the deeper we went into the whispering pines, the more it felt like we were going in circles. We need to stop, Sarah said, her voice strained. We can't keep going in the dark. I wanted to argue, but she was right. We were all worn out, and continuing blindly through the night would only make things worse. So we found a small clearing and set up camp. I made sure the fire was big, bigger than usual. Something about the light made me feel safer, even if it was just an illusion. As we sat around the fire, the silence felt heavier than ever. Jake hadn't said a word since we saw that thing in the trees. Greg was scribbling notes in his journal, though I couldn't imagine what he thought he was going to explain. And Sarah, she just stared into the flames, her face pale and drawn. "What do you think it was?" Mia finally asked, breaking the tension. I didn't want to answer, but I knew I had to. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But it wasn't Daniel." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "It looked like him, though, didn't it?" I shook my head. It might have looked like him, but that wasn't human. No way. Greg cleared his throat, looking up from his notes. "There are stories, legends about creatures in the forest, things that can mimic humans. Skinwalkers, I think they're called." "Skinwalkers?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. "Like from those old Navajo stories?" Greg nodded. "They can take the form of people, animals, whatever they want. It's said they use voices to lure people in." "That's just a myth." Sarah cut in, her tone sharp. "Stories to scare kids around the campfire." "Maybe," Greg said, "but what we saw out there, it fits the description." Before we could debate it further, a voice broke through the silence. "Help, help me." We all froze. It was a woman's voice calling out from the trees, and not just any voice, Mia's voice. We turned to Mia, who sat with us by the fire, her face draining of all color. That's my voice," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. The voice called out again, sounding even closer this time. "Please help me, I'm lost." I stood up, heart pounding in my chest. "Stay close to the fire," I warned the others. "It's trying to trick us." "But it sounds so real," Mia whispered, her hands shaking. "How can it sound exactly like me?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but we're not going anywhere." The voice continued, now circling our camp, calling for help in Mia's voice. each time more desperate than the last. But we stayed put, huddled by the fire, refusing to be lured into the dark. And then, without warning, the voice stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. For a few minutes, no one moved, no one spoke. We just sat there, listening to the crackling fire and the eerie quiet of the forest. And then out of nowhere, Mia screamed. We all turned to see her being dragged away into the darkness, her legs kicking wildly, her hands clawing at the ground. Her scream echoed through the trees, and then, just like that, it was replaced by an awful, twisted version of her own voice, calling back to us. "Help! Help me! I'm lost." I grabbed a flashlight and ran toward where Mia had been dragged, but there was nothing, no sign of her, just more of that horrible silence, and the sound of her voice, no, the creature's voice, calling out from deeper in the forest. "It's playing with us," Sarah whispered, her face pale. "It's taking us one by one." I felt panic rising in my chest, but I pushed it down. "We need to get to the old watchtower," I said, my voice firm. "If there's any chance of getting help, that's our best shot." Greg looked doubtful. "What makes you think we'll make it?" "We don't have a choice," I snapped, trying to keep control of the situation. "It's either that or we sit here and wait for it to come back." Sarah nodded, standing up. "Ethan's right. We need to move." We packed up quickly, the fire still burning behind us as we plunged back into the darkness of the forest. The creature's voice followed us the entire way, calling our names in familiar voices, always just out of sight. But no matter how fast we moved, I could feel it closing in. We were being hunted, and I had no idea how we were going to survive. We made it to the old watchtower just as the last light of the day faded behind the mountains. The wooden structure loomed above us, tall and weathered, with broken windows and a door that hung crooked on its hinges. It wasn't much, but it was our only chance. I wasn't even sure if the radio inside still worked, but right now it was better than being out in the open with that thing stalking us. "Get inside, quick!" I ordered, pushing Jake and Sarah through the door. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the creature right behind us, but the forest was eerily still. That was the worst part. The waiting. It was toying with us, and we all knew it. We barricaded the door with an old wooden beam, then piled up whatever we could find, broken chairs, an old desk, anything that might slow it down. Sarah rushed to check the radio, but from the look on her face, I could tell it wasn't good. "It's dead," she muttered, kicking the useless machine in frustration. "No power, no signal. We're trapped." Jake sat down in the corner, his hands shaking. "We're not going to make it, are we?" "We will," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "We just need to hold out until morning." But even as I said the words, the whispering began. At first it was faint, like wind slipping through the cracks in the walls, but then it grew louder, more distinct, voices, familiar voices. "Ethan," it was Mia's voice, soft and pleading, coming from just outside the door. "Ethan, please help me." My heart raced. I knew it wasn't really her, but hearing her voice so close, so desperate, made it hard to think straight. The others heard it too. Jake's eyes were wide with fear, and even Sarah looked shaken. "It's not real," Sarah said firmly, as if trying to convince herself. "It's just the creature trying to trick us." But the voices didn't stop. Now Greg was calling out, his voice sounding broken and pained. "Ethan, help me. It's too dark." I gripped the flashlight tighter, my knuckles white. The whispers circled the tower, growing louder, more insistent. And then something began scratching at the door. Slow, deliberate scrapes like claws dragging along the wood. "It's here," Jake whispered, his face pale. He was shaking uncontrollably now, curled up in the corner, rocking back and forth. "It's here." "Stay calm," I told him, though my own heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear myself think. "It can't get in, not with the door barricaded." But the scratching grew louder. It sounded like nails raking across the wood. And then the voices began again, this time in Sarah's voice. "Ethan, let me in." I shot a glance at Sarah, who was standing by the window, her eyes wide with terror. That's my voice," she whispered, backing away from the wall. The creature was taunting us, using our own voices against us, and the fear in the room was rising by the second. Jake was nearly hysterical, and even Sarah, who had always been the strongest, was starting to crumble. "We can't stay here," I said finally, my voice tight with panic. "It's only a matter of time before it gets in." "How?" Sarah demanded, her voice trembling. "We can't outrun it. We can't fight it." I didn't have an answer, but I knew we had to do something. Sitting here, waiting for the creature to break through, was suicide. Then an idea hit me. It was desperate, but it might just work. "Distract it," I said suddenly, looking at Sarah. "I'll distract it, draw it away from the door while you and Jake make a run for it." "No way," Sarah protested. "You're not going out there alone." "I have to," I said firmly. "It's the only way. If I can draw it far enough away, you might be able to slip past it and make it to the ranger station. There's another radio there. If it still works, you can call for help." Sarah looked torn, but she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "But you come back. Promise me." "I'll try," I said, though I knew it was a promise I might not be able to keep. With one last deep breath, I unblocked the door, the scratching growing louder the moment I touched the beam. The voices stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl from the other side. It was waiting for me. I threw the door open and sprinted into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I could hear the creature behind me, its footsteps fast and heavy, chasing me through the trees. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. "Come on," I yelled, my voice hoarse. "You want me? Here I am." I heard a snarl. Close now. Too close. My legs burned, but I pushed harder, darting between the trees, trying to lead away from the watchtower. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it, a figure running alongside me. It was the creature. Its body shifted, its face twisted, until it looked just like me. For the first time in my life, I felt true terror. It was wearing my face, and then it lunged. The sound of rain on the tin roof of the outpost still makes my stomach twist. Even now, years later, when I hear that hollow tapping, I can smell the damp timber of that cabin in the woods, the scent of wet pine and oil from the lanterns. It's strange how sound carries emotion, how a single rhythm can drag you backward through time and drop you somewhere you swore you'd never return. That's what happened to me. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that for 15 years, I worked as a ranger in the northern ranges of the Bitterroot Wilderness, a stretch of land that swallows men whole and gives back only echoes. I knew the land like my own mind, and maybe that's why I didn't notice when both began to rot. It started small, the way things always do. The locals used to talk about the caves out there, long basalt tunnels from old lava flows that twist beneath the pines like veins. Some say they breathe when the temperature drops. Hunters would joke about hearing footsteps underground or whispers that followed the riverbeds. I used to laugh that off. The mind fills silence with ghosts. That's what I told the new recruits. Back then, I believed reason could conquer fear, that if you could name something, you could own it. But I was wrong. My first encounter came late one October, a cold front pushing across the range. We'd been tracking a lost hiker, a young guy from Missoula who'd gone off-trail near Elk Tooth Pass. His fiancée reported him missing after he sent a photo of the sunset from a ridge no one recognized. We found his car, door open, keys still dangling. I remember kneeling by that open door, raindrops forming tiny mirrors in the dust, each one reflecting the same thing, the forest staring back. The first night of the search, I camped near the lower riverbed where the rocks formed natural steps leading to a hollow opening, a cave mouth half hidden by brush. The air there had a strange weight, as though sound couldn't quite escape. When I called out his name, it didn't echo. It just died in my throat. I told myself I'd check it in daylight. But as I set up camp, something odd happened. My radio kept crackling with a voice that wasn't dispatch, just fragments. A whisper, like wind sliding through wire. Go back, go back. I turned it off, checked the battery, the channel, everything. No one was near enough to interfere. Still, the words had that human rhythm, that hesitating breath between syllables that machines can't fake. That night, I dreamed of water. I was standing waist deep in an underground river, flashlight flickering, and something brushed my leg. When I looked down, the beam caught fabric, olive green, a ranger uniform like mine, drifting in the current. A pale hand floated beside it, and I woke to the sound of my tent zipper rising slowly from the outside. When I tore it open, no one was there. Only footprints in the mud, bare, human, leading from the riverbank toward the cave. I followed them with my flashlight, trembling in my hand. The deeper I went, the colder it grew. My breath came out as mist. The air had that mineral bite, damp limestone, mold, something older beneath it all, like animal musk left for centuries. Then I heard the radio again, faint from inside the cave. Go back. The beam of my light swept across the walls. For a second, I thought I saw carvings, rough symbols, circular patterns, overlapping hands pressed into the rock. But when I stepped closer, they were gone, or maybe my light just stuttered. I kept moving forward until the ground disappeared. My boot found only air, and the flashlight dropped, spinning in the dark, catching a glimpse of something below. Fabric again, olive green, tangled among black water and stone. I climbed out shaking, covered in mud, and radioed base. By morning, I couldn't find the cave again. The hillside looked the same, but the brush had shifted, the rocks misplaced. The footprints had washed away. The others thought I was exhausted. Maybe I was. We called off the search after 6 days. They found the hiker's backpack 30 miles north, perfectly dry, sitting upright on a boulder as if placed there. Inside were folded maps, snacks, and a ranger patch, one I'd lost years before. No one could explain that. After that, things changed. I started hearing my own name on the radio at night, whispered in static. Once, I walked into the outpost and found my uniform hung neatly on the wall hook, the old torn one I'd thrown away after the search. I didn't keep it. The others thought it was a prank. Maybe it was, but there was no laughter in their eyes. Winter came hard that year. Deep snow sealed off half the trails, and a few of us rotated shifts maintaining fire watch. The others preferred working near the valley stations, where you could still see light from the town after dark. I volunteered for the ridge post, alone, quiet, and high enough to see storms crawl over the tree line. It's strange how solitude can feel like both safety and exposure at once. You start thinking the forest knows you're there, that it breathes around you. One night, around 2 a.m., the temperature dropped so fast my breath froze against my collar. I stepped outside the tower, and the world was so silent it felt staged. Not even the usual creak of the pines or rustle of snow. I remember shining my light across the clearing and seeing footprints, barefoot again, weaving in circles below the tower. Then the radio whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I froze. "Identify yourself," I said. Nothing. Just breathing on the other end, slow, uneven, like someone standing right behind me. When dawn came, the footprints had vanished, but there was something beneath the tower stairs. A ranger hat, soaked and heavy with ice. My stomach sank when I saw the initials stitched inside the band, mine. The mind starts playing tricks when fear becomes constant. You tell yourself it's isolation, sleep deprivation, anything but what it feels like. I filed the report, but I left that out. Who would believe it? Still, I couldn't shake the sense that someone or something was using my own shape to move through the forest. I began to find my boot prints in places I hadn't been, see my handwriting in the logbooks for nights I didn't remember. One morning, dispatch said they'd received a transmission from my unit ID after midnight. A calm voice reporting, "Incident resolved, subject found." But I'd been asleep and my radio was off. Then came the day they found the uniform. A hiker came into the station, pale and shaking, said he'd been camping near the upper caves when he saw what looked like a man's jacket, tangled in roots. The tag read, U.S. Forest Service. I went out there with 2 others, trying not to show the dread rising in my chest. When we reached the spot, I stopped breathing. It wasn't just a jacket. It was a full uniform, mine, folded neatly, badge polished, boots lined side by side. No body, no footprints leading away. Just that uniform, laid out like someone had undressed in silence and walked into the earth. They asked if it was mine. I said yes, but it couldn't be. I was wearing mine right then. Still, the badge number matched. That was the last night I ever felt sure of who I was. I stayed late in the ranger station that night, watching the fire crackle against the window glass. The others had gone down to town for supplies, but I couldn't bring myself to leave the station. Not after seeing that uniform. There's something about seeing your own name stitched into something that shouldn't exist that makes your mind start folding in on itself. I kept trying to explain it. Maybe a duplicate, maybe old gear lost in the system. But deep down, I knew. The forest doesn't misplace things, it trades them. The storm rolled in after midnight. The wind came down from the ridge so violently that the roof groaned and the window panes flexed in their frames. I made tea, but it tasted of iron. The water from the tap ran brown for a moment before clearing. The generator flickered, and with it the radio came alive again. Static at first, a hollow, scratching sound like fingernails against wood. Then my own voice. Not similar. Not distorted. My exact voice saying, "I found him." I froze. The mug slipped from my hand and shattered. I turned down the gain on the radio, checked the frequency, but the words repeated, softer, as if receding. I found him. Then a breath. He's wearing mine. He's wearing mine. My own voice breathing those words. The power cut out completely. The only sound left was the storm, and then, beneath it, a rhythmic tapping at the door. 3 knocks. Slow. Patient. I didn't move. The tapping came again, this time softer, like fingertips brushing against wood instead of knuckles. Then a voice, low, muffled by the door, but clear enough to recognize. It's me. You left your uniform outside. I think fear has stages. The first is denial. You tell yourself it's a prank, a dream. The second is stillness. You go so quiet you start hearing your own heartbeat echoing in your skull. I reached for my flashlight, switched it on, and pointed it toward the door's glass. A silhouette stood beyond it, framed by the lightning flashes. Tall. Human. Wearing my uniform. The badge caught the light, my name glinting in the reflection. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe. Then it raised a hand and pressed it against the glass, palm flat, fingers splayed. My own fingerprints were on the inside of that same pane, perfect matches. I stepped back, radio trembling in my hand. "Who are you?" I whispered. The answer came in the same voice. "You were supposed to go back." And then, silence. The power surged back, lights flickered, and the figure was gone. No footprints outside, no sign of anyone. Just the echo of those words hanging in my mind, "Go back." The next morning, I filed an incident report but left out the details. I said I saw movement near the station, possible intruder, uniform unknown. They sent 2 agents from the regional office to investigate. I watched them sift through mud prints and security footage, but the cameras glitched that night. All they found was static. When they left, one of them, a woman named Porter, pulled me aside. She said quietly, "You're not the first to see your own uniform out here." Then she handed me a small notebook, leather-bound, damp at the edges. This was found near Hollow Creek 3 years ago. Belonged to Ranger Ellis. Read it. I didn't open it until the next day. The handwriting was shaky, smeared by moisture, but legible. Ellis had written about hearing his name in the wind, about seeing himself through the trees. His last entry read, "They found my hat. It was still warm." 2 weeks later, he disappeared. They found his uniform folded by the riverbank, just like mine. No body ever recovered. That's when I started studying the maps more carefully. Not the ones we gave hikers, but the old geological charts. The rangers before us used to mark sinkholes, caves, and underground passages that never made it onto modern maps. I noticed something strange. Each disappearance lined up with a cave system shaped like a loop, circling back into itself. The locals called them echo chambers. It was superstition, they said, stories to keep children from wandering. But I couldn't ignore it. The same pattern kept showing up, a circle carved into the landscape, a place where time and sound didn't behave right. So, one evening, against orders, I hiked out alone toward the ridge where we found the uniform. Snow was falling hard, thick as ash, muffling every sound. My radio barely picked up reception, but I left it on. The static comforted me. After 2 miles, I found it, an opening in the rock, perfectly round, smooth as if carved by hand. Inside, the air was warmer, thick with the scent of rust and earth. My flashlight beam caught fragments of fabric snagged on stone, Ranger green again. I pressed deeper until I heard something impossible. The echo of my own footsteps, but delayed, mismatched. When I stopped walking, the echo kept going. It was as if another version of me was still moving forward in the dark. I whispered hello and heard my voice answer back a half-second later, hello. But the inflection was wrong. Not mimicry. Memory. I turned the flashlight forward. The beam landed on something pale and wrinkled. A face. My face. Staring back. I stumbled, dropped the light, scrambled backward until I hit the wall. But when I grabbed the flashlight again, the space ahead was empty. Only wet rock, dripping with condensation that glistened like sweat. I ran. I don't remember the path out, just the sensation of breath tearing at my chest, of the forest swallowing every sound I made. By the time I reached the station, dawn was breaking. My uniform, the one I'd worn into the cave, was gone. The replacement from storage fit perfectly, down to the worn patch near the elbow. They found me sitting outside, covered in mud, radio clutched in my hands. I told them I got lost. That was the story that went into the report. But that night, dispatch radioed again, saying they'd received a call on my channel just after dawn, the same time I returned. The voice had said only one thing. Subject found. Ranger accounted for. Except it wasn't me who made that call. And when I checked the recording later, the voice was clear. Calm, my own. I didn't sleep for days after that. Every creak of the cabin, every flicker of light against the window felt like a signal. I tried convincing myself it was stress, but deep down I knew that wasn't it. Something had crossed a line that night, something I couldn't rationalize away. The forest had heard me, and now it was answering. The supervisor called me into the regional office after the second incident report. He was kind about it, too kind, the way people talk to someone they think is breaking down. He asked if I'd like a few weeks off. You've seen some rough things, he said. A lot of good rangers lose sleep after searches like that. I nodded, signed the forms, and took the leave. But I didn't go home. Instead, I drove north toward the old ranger routes, the ones they'd shut down in the 90s. There's a small stretch near the Bitterroot Divide where the road just ends. Used to be a supply trail for lookout posts that no longer exist. My gut told me that's where the others disappeared, where the caves twisted deepest. The drive took hours. The forest grew thicker, darker, the air changing in ways that only wilderness can. Colder without wind, heavier without humidity. I parked where the asphalt gave way to gravel and started hiking with only a pack and a lantern. Snowmelt ran beneath the surface, invisible rivers whispering beneath my boots. By late afternoon, I reached a clearing ringed with firs so dense they looked painted on the sky. In the center was a single post, a ranger marker, old and weathered, half buried in moss. I brushed it clean. The carved letters said, Echo Station, 1973. It wasn't on any map. Beside it, a small path wound downhill, lined with black stones. They weren't natural. They'd been placed there deliberately, like a trail into something meant to be remembered. My heart pounded, but I followed. The air shifted again as I descended, the temperature dropping with each step. The sound of the world faded until all that was left was the crunch of my boots. Then ahead, I saw the cave mouth. This one wasn't like the others. It wasn't jagged or wild. It was perfectly round, a man-made arch, framed with stones fitted so tightly you couldn't slide a knife between them. A faint light shimmered inside, orange and flickering like firelight deep underground. I called out, Forest Service! Hello! The echo came back distorted, stretched like elastic. Service. Hello. I stepped closer, lantern raised. The smell hit me first. Damp earth mixed with something metallic, faintly sweet, like blood. I should have turned back right then, but curiosity is a kind of madness. You tell yourself you're investigating. The truth is you're already caught. The tunnel sloped downward, walls narrowing until I had to turn sideways to pass. My shoulders scraped against cold rock slick with moisture. Then the walls opened into a chamber, perfectly circular, the ceiling domed like a cathedral. In the center was a pool of black water reflecting the glow of something beneath the surface, something that pulsed faintly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. I crouched, holding the lantern closer, and saw them. Uniforms. Dozens of them. Ranger greens drifting just below the surface, swaying as though underwater breath kept them alive. Some still had badges attached. I recognized one. Ellis. Another had my name. And then the light beneath the water brightened, and a shape began to rise. At first I thought it was a trick of the reflection, my own outline bending with the ripples. But no, it was me. The same face, same eyes, hair matted with silt, skin pale as wax. It stood beneath the surface, looking up at me, lips moving as though trying to form words. The radio on my belt crackled violently. A voice, my voice, came through. "You're not supposed to see this." I stumbled backward, the lantern swinging wildly. It shattered against the wall, plunging the chamber into darkness. Only the glow from beneath the water remained, that terrible pulse. Then came the sound. Hundreds of small splashes, as if hands were rising to the surface. I ran. My boots slipped on the slick stone. My shoulders slammed against the archway. The cave seemed to breathe around me. A deep inhale, followed by the distant whisper of my own name. Go back. When I burst into the open air, the forest felt wrong. The trees were positioned differently, leaning inward, their branches black against a sky that had turned bruised purple. My compass spun uselessly. I picked a direction and moved until the last of the daylight vanished. At dawn, I found my truck again. At least I think it was mine. The plates were the same, but there was frost on the windshield, thick enough to scrape. I checked my watch. It had stopped. The date still read 3 days earlier. When I returned to the station, no one believed where I'd been. They said I'd been gone only one night. Porter looked at me like she wanted to ask something but didn't. That evening, she handed me a sealed bag, another uniform, waterlogged, found near the ridge. The badge gleamed faintly under the light. My name. My handwriting on the stitched tag. I told her it wasn't mine. But she didn't argue. She just said, "We'll log it under missing inventory." Since then, I've started to notice small differences, things that shouldn't bother me, but do. The coffee tin on the shelf is on the left, not the right. My key ring has one extra key. My reflection sometimes blinks a half second too late, and when I stand by the mirror at night, I swear I can hear another breath beside mine, perfectly synchronized. The forest doesn't take people by accident. It collects versions of them, the ones who cross too far into silence, who ignore the warning to go back. Sometimes I wonder if that's what happened to the hiker, if he heard his own name too and followed it until there was nothing left to return to. Every few months, another uniform turns up, folded neatly, badge polished, no body, no tracks. They found his uniform, but the ranger was gone. And if I'm being honest, sometimes I think they might have found mine too, because lately when I hear the radio crackle at night, I can hear someone reporting in, calm, professional, confident. He says he's me, and sometimes I believe him. I've worked in the forest long enough to know that silence isn't peace, it's pressure. It's the air holding its breath before something changes. That's the kind of quiet that sat over the ridge that morning when I realized something was wrong. Not because of what I could see, but because of what I could hear. My own voice calling back to me from somewhere deep in the trees. My name's Sam, and I've been a forest ranger for 12 years now. I work out of a small outpost tucked between the Bitterroot Mountains and the Selway Wilderness, an old ranger cabin built from pine that's silvered from years of storms and smoke. Most of my days are predictable, checking trail markers, managing fire risks, talking to campers who think they're the first ones to ever see a bear. But every so often, the forest shows you something that doesn't fit into training manuals or field reports, something that stays with you even when you try to bury it. It started in early October, just before the first frost rolled in. I was doing my rounds near an area the locals call Gray Hollow. Not many people go there anymore, not since the landslide 3 years ago took out part of the trail and a couple of hikers who were never found. I've been through that place dozens of times. It's cold and quiet, and the air smells faintly metallic, like wet stone and old blood, the kind of place where sound feels heavier, slower. You can whisper and hear it bounce off the trunks. That morning, I'd been tracking something, maybe a bear, maybe a person. I found partial prints along the edge of the creek, but they didn't make sense. The toes looked human, but too long, too spread out, and deep enough that whatever made them was heavy. I radioed it into the station, but there was static on every frequency. Just that low, humming kind of distortion that feels like it's crawling into your ear. When I turned back toward the trail, I heard it. My name. Sam. It came from behind me, soft and strained, like someone calling through a mouthful of water. I spun around, hand on my sidearm, and called back, "Who's there?" The echo repeated it perfectly. "Who's there?" But it wasn't an echo. I know the sound of my own voice when it comes from across a canyon. This was closer, sharper. It came from the trees no more than 30 yards away. For a second, I thought maybe it was another ranger messing with me, or a lost hiker trying to get my attention. But the tone was wrong. It had my cadence, my rhythm, but no breath behind it, like hearing a recording of yourself with all the warmth stripped out. I shouted again, nothing, just the wind moving through the branches. I walked toward where the sound came from, and the air changed, thicker, colder. The forest went still in that unnatural way when not even the crows or squirrels make noise. That's when I noticed something strange about the ground, the prints I'd been following. They didn't just go forward, they circled. Like something had been walking in loops around that same clearing for hours. I backed away slowly. You learn early on as a ranger that the woods don't care if you believe in anything. They'll still make you pay attention. I reported it that night, but the response from the main station was routine. They logged it as possible interference or local acoustic phenomenon. I didn't argue. I just went home and tried to forget it. But the voice came back. 3 nights later, I was at the cabin alone. The other ranger assigned to this sector, Wallace, had driven into town to resupply, leaving me to watch the radios. I had a small fire going, the logs hissing as sap burned off when I heard tapping on the back door. Not knocking, tapping, slow, rhythmic. I froze, waiting. Then I heard it again. Tap, tap, pause, tap. It sounded like it was coming from the wood right behind my chair. I stood up, flashlight in hand, and walked toward the door. The tapping stopped. "Who's out there?" I called. Nothing. Then from right outside the wall, I heard my voice say, "Who's out there?" I felt the blood drain from my face. The flashlight trembled in my hand. I didn't open the door. I just stood there, breathing shallow, listening. The voice repeated it, quieter this time. Then silence again. I stepped back, locked the door, and radioed dispatch. Static. Just that low hum again. I shut the radio off and waited till morning. When Wallace came back, I didn't tell him. I knew how it sounded. But that day, we hiked back toward Gray Hollow together to check some fallen trees. Halfway there, he stopped, squinting toward a ridge. "You hear that?" he asked. I didn't at first. Then it came again. A whistle. Not a bird, not wind. Human. But strange, drawn out too long and bending upward at the end like someone trying to remember how to make the sound. Wallace frowned. "Probably some kids." "Kids don't come out this far," I said. He looked uneasy, but didn't argue. We kept walking until we reached a small ravine. There, we found a piece of fabric caught on a branch, dark green, torn. It looked like a part of an old ranger uniform. The fabric was damp and stiff, like it had been out there a while. Wallace picked it up, turned it over in his glove, then froze. His face went pale. "Sam, this has your name tag." I took it from him. The name strip was half torn, but the letters Sam were still visible. That's when I realized I'd never lost a jacket. We stood there in the silence, the forest pressing in on all sides. And then, from somewhere in the trees behind us, came the sound of footsteps, light, steady, mimicking ours exactly. When we stopped, they stopped. When we turned, they turned. Wallace whispered, "Someone's screwing with us." "Or something," I said. He tried to laugh it off, but it came out hollow. We headed back fast, checking over our shoulders every few minutes. The footsteps followed until the sound of the river drowned them out. That night, Wallace didn't sleep much. Neither did I. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the radio crackling. I thought maybe he was calling someone, but when I looked, the mic was untouched. The static pulsed, then broke. "Sam." It was my voice again. Wallace sat up in his bunk. "What the hell was that?" Before I could answer, the voice came again, clearer, closer. "Sam, open the door." We stared at each other. I shut off the radio. The cabin went silent, but outside, faintly, I heard the door handle rattle. When the sun rose, Wallace wanted to leave. He said he needed a break, maybe transfer to another post. I didn't blame him, but something in me couldn't walk away. Call it duty or denial or some stupid pride, but I needed to know what was out there. Over the next week, I went back into Gray Hollow. I followed the tracks, the echoes, the sounds. The deeper I went, the more wrong the forest felt. Animals avoided it. The birds that usually followed me, the little black-capped chickadees, they were gone. Even the air smelled wrong, like earth that hadn't seen light in years. On the 5th day, I found the cave. It wasn't marked on any of our maps. The entrance was narrow, half hidden by brush and stone. I only saw it because a gust of wind pushed through, carrying that same faint echo, my name again, drawn out and hollow. My instincts screamed not to go in, but I did. Inside, it was cold enough that my breath turned white. The floor sloped downward, and the walls were slick with something that looked like condensation but felt sticky when my glove brushed it. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. My footsteps didn't even echo. And then I heard it. Breathing. Not my own. Slow, deep, ragged. I raised my flashlight and saw movement at the far end of the chamber. Something tall, pale, and hunched. Its arms hung too low, its head tilted like it was listening. When the light hit it, it stepped back into the dark, but not before I saw its mouth open. It didn't have teeth, just a long, wet slit where sound came out. Then it spoke. My voice. "Sam!" And that's when I ran. I don't remember how long I ran. The cave walls narrowed as I stumbled upward, the beam of my flashlight jerking across slick stone, the air tasting of rot and cold metal. Behind me, I could hear it, my own footsteps echoing, but a half-second too late. The thing was mimicking even that, pacing itself to my panic. By the time I burst into the open air, my lungs were on fire. The forest outside was still gray, the light washed out by mist. I didn't stop running until I reached the ridge where the trees opened to a long, rocky drop toward the valley. My knees gave out, and I just sat there, shaking. Everything inside me wanted to turn back and confirm what I'd seen, but some instinct, older than logic, told me that looking again would break me. So I stared down into the hollow instead, trying to steady my breathing. That's when I noticed something strange. In the fog below, movement. A figure stepping out of the tree line, dragging its arm along the ground as it walked. Even from that distance, I could see it move wrong, like its joints were arranged backward. Then it lifted its head toward me, and it waved, not frantic or threatening, just a slow, deliberate wave. Then, in my voice, faint but clear as a bell, it said, "You left something behind, Sam." My blood ran cold. I clutched at my radio, but my fingers were trembling so badly I couldn't even press the button. The figure stood there for a moment longer, then disappeared into the fog. I didn't go back to the cabin right away. I wandered the ridge until my legs stopped working, until the sun sank behind the tree line. When I finally made it back, Wallace was gone. His truck was still there, but his bunk was empty, and his gear was missing. The door had been left open just a crack. On the table sat a single note. It said, "If you hear yourself calling, don't answer." The handwriting was shaky, the ink smeared. That night, I packed what I could and left a report at the main station. I didn't tell them everything, just enough to make them believe it was unsafe. They sealed off Gray Hollow after that, citing unstable terrain and unexploded munitions from old training exercises. But I know better. I tried to move on, transferred to another post, higher up near Glacier, where the air is sharp and the trees thin out near the ridges. For a while, I convinced myself it was over, until the voice came back. It was midwinter, and the snow was thick enough that the forest seemed soundproof. I was snowed in at the lookout tower, 40 feet above the frozen world, nothing but static on the radio and the groan of the wind against the glass. I'd been reading when I heard it, faint through the storm. Sam. It wasn't outside this time. It was on the stairs. Slow, deliberate steps, climbing up one by one. I stood frozen, heart hammering, staring at the door that led to the platform. The handle twitched, then turned. I didn't move. The door creaked open just an inch, and a hand gripped the frame, pale, long-fingered, half-covered in frost. Then my own face leaned into the doorway. It smiled, and in a whisper that matched my breath, it said, "You shouldn't have left." I must have blacked out after that, because the next thing I remember is waking up at dawn, slumped against the wall. The door was shut, and there were no footprints in the snow outside. But the air inside the tower smelled faintly of earth, like the cave. After that, I started keeping notes, not reports, not journal entries, just details, times, sounds, patterns, trying to make sense of it. The voice didn't always sound the same. Sometimes it was clear and human, sometimes warped and deep, like it was coming from under the ground. But what terrified me most wasn't when it called my name. It was when it didn't. Sometimes I'd hear it talking in another room, having half a conversation that didn't make sense. My tone, my rhythm, but saying things I'd never said, as if it was practicing. I tried recording it once. The tape was empty. I told myself I was cracking under the pressure, that isolation does strange things to the mind. But there was something about the way the animals started avoiding me, the way the other rangers started glancing sideways when I walked in, like they could feel something was off. One night, while patrolling the lower ridge, I met a hunter. He was old, wiry, with eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. He told me he used to trap near Gray Hollow decades ago before it was closed off. "You ever hear voices that sound like yourself?" I asked him. He didn't even blink, just nodded slowly. "That's the forest remembering you," he said. "Sometimes it keeps a peace." I laughed it off, but he didn't smile. He went on, "It starts with the echo, then it learns the tone, then it learns you." He said that some places in the forest weren't just empty, they were hungry. That sometimes when people vanished, they didn't die, they just became part of the echo. I never saw that hunter again after that night. But the next morning, I found tracks in the snow outside my cabin, bare footprints, long and narrow, leading right up to my door, and beside them, my own boot prints, except I hadn't left the cabin all night. That was the breaking point. I took 2 weeks of leave and went down to Missoula to stay with my sister. City air, lights, noise. I thought maybe that would reset me. But the thing about the forest is once it's in you, it doesn't let go. The first few nights were quiet. Then one morning, she knocked on my door, pale and shaking. She said she heard me talking in the kitchen at 3 a.m., but when she went to check, the room was empty. She asked who I was talking to. I told her I'd been asleep. She didn't believe me. That night, I stayed up with a flashlight and my old Ranger knife beside me. At 2:47 a.m., I heard it again, from the kitchen. My voice, whispering, low and calm, saying something I couldn't quite catch. I crept down the hall, careful not to breathe too loud. The whispering stopped, and then from right behind me, my voice said, "You're going the wrong way." I spun around. Nothing. When I turned back, the kitchen light was flickering. The window over the sink was open, and a faint wind carried the smell of pine and wet soil. Gray Hollow. The forest had followed me. I left that night, drove until the sky turned gray and the gas gauge blinked red. I ended up parked at a rest stop somewhere near the Idaho border, staring out at the tree line that never seemed to end. That's when I realized something. Every time I ran, the voice followed, but it never crossed the threshold until I spoke back. It mimicked, it waited, it learned. I remembered Wallace's note. If you hear yourself calling, don't answer. Maybe that was the key. maybe the forest doesn't take you unless you let it, or maybe it already has, because even now, sitting here telling you this, there's a part of me that isn't sure which version of me made it out. Sometimes when the wind hits the trees just right, I swear I hear two voices. Both sound like mine, and one of them laughs. I stayed on the move after that. Slept in my truck for weeks, avoiding the woods altogether. Every time I thought about going back, I'd hear that voice in my memory, my own tones stretched and hollow, whispering through the trees. It was like something had gotten inside my head, echoing there. Sometimes I'd talk just to test myself, to make sure my voice still sounded human, still mine. But even then, I wasn't always sure. Eventually, I took a temporary posting in the Plains District, a place so flat and open you could see a storm coming from 20 miles away. No thick forest, no caves, no echoes. I thought maybe I'd finally be safe there. The first few months were uneventful, just fields, roads, and long stretches of nothing. My nights were filled with wind and the hum of the radio. I started to feel normal again, like the forest had finally let me go. But then one evening, I was driving back from a wildfire survey when I saw someone walking along the service road. It was past midnight, and the air was heavy with the smell of rain. The figure had no flashlight, no gear, just walking straight down the middle of the dirt road. When I slowed down, my headlights caught his face. He looked exactly like me. Same jacket, same cap, same expression. He raised his hand, not in a wave, but in a warning. A slow, deliberate motion, palm facing out. Then he pointed off toward the dark horizon. The radio on my dash hissed with static. Then my voice said, "Don't look where he's pointing." I slammed on the brakes. The figure was gone. I sat there for what felt like an hour, heart pounding, headlights cutting into the dust. Eventually, I drove back to the station, every nerve screaming. When I got inside, I checked the mirror in the locker room, half expecting not to see my own reflection. But I did. Only my reflection didn't move right. It blinked too late. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind outside kept shifting directions, blowing in through cracks in the old wooden frame. I could hear faint tapping on the windows, like branches, but there were no trees nearby. At 3 a.m., the power went out. The only sound was the wind. Then, from the dark, my radio crackled to life again. "Sam!" It wasn't loud. It was careful, measured. Then a pause. "Come back." I stood there in the dark, holding my breath, staring at the radio. The voice came again. This time softer. "You left something behind." I pulled the plug out of the wall, but the radio kept hissing. I slammed it against the counter until it broke apart, the sound dying only when the speaker cracked. After that night, I stopped using the radio altogether. I told the chief the power fluctuations were messing with communications. He didn't argue. But I knew it wasn't the power. It was listening. Weeks passed. I avoided the night shifts, avoided silence, avoided anything that reminded me of Gray Hollow. I started wearing earplugs when I slept. Still, sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and feel breath on my ear, like someone leaning close, waiting for me to speak. Then one morning, I found footprints again. Not in dirt this time, in dew, fresh, clear, leading from the door to the truck, bare feet, and beside them, my boot prints. But the direction was wrong. They led into the building, not out. That day, I finally called headquarters, told them I wasn't well, that I needed to take leave. They approved it without hesitation. Maybe they could hear it in my voice, the exhaustion, the strain, or something else I didn't recognize anymore. I left that same afternoon. As I drove away from the outpost, I glanced in the rearview mirror. There was someone standing in the field beside the road. Tall, still, facing the direction I was headed. The same jacket, the same posture. It raised a hand again. I didn't stop this time. For a while, I stayed with old ranger friends, hopping from one post to another. They said I looked pale, thinner, haunted. I brushed it off as stress, but I could see the way they looked at me when they thought I wasn't watching, like they were trying to decide if I was the same man who'd left years ago. One evening, sitting by a campfire near Flathead, one of them, Mark, told me something that stayed with me since. You ever hear of the echo grounds? He asked. I shook my head. It's what the old-timers call certain parts of the forest, he said. Places where sound doesn't behave right. They say those places don't just reflect noise, they keep it. Every word, every breath, like the land's got a memory, and sometimes when a person spends too much time there, the forest starts remembering them too clearly. I stared at the fire, the flames reflecting off his eyes. What happens then? I asked. Mark shrugged. Sometimes nothing, sometimes it speaks back. He laughed a little after that, but it didn't feel like a joke. That night, as I lay in my tent, the wind picked up. The sound of the trees swaying blended with something faint, something rhythmic. Whispering. It wasn't my imagination, it was my name. Soft, familiar, from inside the tent. I turned on my flashlight, but there was nothing there, just the slow ripple of fabric moving in the wind. Then, just before the whisper faded, I heard it clearly. Stop running. I think that's when I finally understood what it wanted. It wasn't trying to kill me. It wasn't hunting me. It was trying to replace me. Every time I ran, it followed. Every time I spoke, it learned. Every time I doubted my own voice, it grew stronger. And the more I thought about that cave, the more I realized something I hadn't before. When I'd first entered, I'd heard breathing from the dark, but I'd also heard echoes. Echoes that didn't match what I said. Echoes that sounded like someone trying to speak, but forgetting how. Maybe it had found someone before me. Maybe it had already learned how to wear a man's voice. Maybe it had worn many. I started to wonder if Wallace hadn't just disappeared, but if the forest had taken him and learned him too. If maybe, somewhere out there, his voice was still calling mine. And maybe that's what I'd heard all along. Not something imitating me, something calling to me. Because it wanted me back. That was months ago. Now, I live in a cabin far from the parks, near the edge of an empty field where the trees thin out enough that I can see the stars. No radio, no electricity, just silence. Most nights it's peaceful, but sometimes when the air is still and the moonlight falls just right across the window, I hear it again, soft and distant, carried on the wind from the direction of the woods. Sam. The same tone, the same voice. And sometimes, if I listen too long, I can't tell whether it's coming from outside or from my own throat. There are nights I think about going back to Gray Hollow, to that cave, to finish this, to see what it really is that lives beneath those trees. But every time I pack my bag, something in me freezes. Because I know if I step into that forest again, it'll remember me completely. It'll take what's left. And one day someone else will be hiking through those woods, hear their own name whispered back to them, and think it's just an echo. They'll follow it. And when they do, the forest will have another voice to wear. I still write my reports out of habit, but I don't send them anywhere. Just stack them in a drawer beside the window. The words help keep me anchored, I guess, to prove I still exist. But lately I've noticed something strange. When I wake up in the morning, sometimes the pages have changed. The handwriting isn't mine, and the last line is always the same. You're telling my story now. I used to think the worst thing that could happen to a man in the woods was getting lost. You can survive hunger. You can survive thirst. You can even survive fear if you learn how to hold it. But what I've learned, the thing that keeps me awake at night, is that there are places where you don't just lose your way. You lose yourself. It's been a year since I last set foot in that forest, but it's never left me. Sometimes I catch myself humming a tune I don't remember learning, an off-tempo whistle that sounds exactly like the one Wallace and I heard that day near the ravine. Other times I'll hear laughter faintly under the hum of the fridge, laughter that matches the tone of my own but not the rhythm. It always stops the second I notice. One night last winter, during a snowstorm, I woke up to find my front door wide open. No footprints in or out. Just the cold creeping through the threshold and my radio, one I'd smashed to pieces months earlier, sitting neatly on the kitchen table, wires reattached. The static was alive again. At first it was just the usual hum, then the faint sound of breathing, then my voice. But this time it didn't call my name. It whispered, "You forgot what you are." I didn't answer. I didn't move. I just watched the snow swirl in through the doorway, landing on the table beside the broken radio. The voice spoke again, this time in a tone that almost sounded pleading. "Come home, Sam." The air in the cabin felt heavy, pressing down on me. I don't know what made me do it, but I reached for the radio mic, something I swore I'd never touch again, and said, "What are you?" The voice went quiet. Then, after a long pause, it said softly, "You." That was the last time I used the radio. Since then, I've lived like a ghost, off the grid. I only go into town once a month for supplies, and I keep my head down when I do. The world outside feels too loud now, too fast. I can't stand mirrors anymore, because sometimes in the corner of my vision, I'll see my reflection moving half a beat too slow. It started small, a blink that lingered, a mouth that didn't quite match my words. But then I began to notice something worse. The reflection was aging differently. While my hair grayed, the face in the mirror stayed just a little younger, a little more alert, a little too perfect. One morning, I reached up to touch my cheek, and the reflection didn't. It just stared. I covered the mirror with a tarp that same day. Haven't looked at it since. Still, I feel it sometimes, standing behind that cloth. Waiting. I think it's learning again. A few months ago, I got a letter. No return address. Just a single line written in the same uneven handwriting that used to be on Wallace's note. "If you hear yourself outside, don't let him in." No one but Wallace and I ever knew about that first note. I burned the original years ago, and yet here it was again, the same words, same crooked lettering. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, listening to the woods shift under the moonlight. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the porch, slow, deliberate, crunching through the frost. Then a knock, 3 soft taps. Sam. My own voice, right outside the door. Calm, familiar. "Let me in." I stayed silent. The voice came again, but this time there was something different. It wasn't mimicking me anymore. It was begging. "Please, I'm cold." I pressed my back against the wall, trying not to breathe. "Sam, I'm you," it whispered. "You locked me out." The knocking stopped. For a while there was nothing. Then the sound of footsteps moving away, fading into the woods. But when I looked at the snow the next morning, I saw only one set of footprints. Mine, leading away from the door. Something broke in me after that. I started thinking that maybe what the hunter told me all those years ago was true, that the forest remembers us too well, that when you walk into it long enough, your echo starts walking back. It doesn't hunt you. It becomes you. Maybe it needs the space you leave behind. Maybe that's how the forest keeps balance, by trading one life for another. Lately, I've been feeling hollow, like there's an emptiness behind my voice when I speak. Sometimes I'll say something and it'll sound wrong, like I'm hearing it from across a canyon. Sometimes I wake up with dirt under my nails, pine needles in my sheets. I haven't been outside, at least I don't remember going outside. Last night, I finally pulled the tarp off the mirror. I don't know why. Maybe I was tired of the waiting. Maybe I needed to see what was left of me. At first, it was just my face. Older, thinner, eyes sunken from sleeplessness. But then, behind my reflection, in the faint dark of the window's glass, I saw movement, a shape standing in the tree line. Tall, still, watching. And even though the window was shut, I could hear it whispering, my voice carried on the wind. "You're home now." I don't know if I'm writing this for anyone to find, or if it's just for me, to prove I'm still here, still real. But if you're reading this, and you ever find yourself in a forest that feels too quiet, where your echo sounds just a little too close, turn around. Don't call out, don't listen when it whispers back, because it's not an echo. It's the forest remembering you. And once it learns your voice, it never forgets. Sometimes, when the nights are long and the wind drifts through the cracks in the cabin, I hear 2 voices whispering just beyond the door. Both sound like me, both calling the other home. And I can't tell anymore which one of us is on the inside.